Do not fall for the trap. These four players are in form, but I'm telling you not to buy them for game week 10. Yes, they may look attractive, but just like girls in Colombia, you'll take them home and wake up missing your wallet and kidney. So do not make your transfers this week without watching this video. Welcome to FPL Sucks, the best worst manager you've ever seen. Here first with a quick disclaimer.
These recommendations are backed by hardcore data. If I tell you to avoid a player and they score, or to buy a player and they get a red card, don't come back crying, oh, but you said to do this, well, I ain't gonna listen. I'm right more times than I'm wrong because I recommend what's best on paper. But of course, as legendary manager Brian Clough once said, FPL isn't played on paper, it's played on your phone when taking a dump. A wise man, ahead of his time.
So now that's out of the way, I'm going to move on to trap number 1. This is already controversial. It's Van de Ven. Now just hear me out. I'm aware I'm going to sound ridiculous for a couple of reasons. Reason number 1, he's just scored 2 goals against Everton, plus a clean sheet, and ended with a crazy 23 points. And reason number 2, I have him in my team, yet I'm telling people to avoid him. So let me just clarify. I'm just telling you not to buy him now for these next couple game weeks. I think his transfer can be better used elsewhere. So let's have a look at how he's been performing the last 4 game weeks and who that was against first. He obviously played Everton in the last game, which he absolutely smashed, and then Aston Villa, Leeds and Wolves. And in that time, he has only kept 1 clean sheet, and his only goal involvement were those 2 goals against Everton. And he's not really a player who's been getting the extra bonus defensive contribution points. So if we're being honest here, looking at those 4 games, those are favourable games. So to only come away with 1 clean sheet out of those 4, that's not necessarily a huge green flag in my book. And I'd imagine in yours if you're looking at it objectively. So what about his next upcoming game weeks? Well, next he has Chelsea, and then Man United, and then Arsenal, and then Fulham. So maybe they can get 1 clean sheet. But let's be realistic, even though Chelsea haven't been on form, they're still dangerous, they can still score goals. Man United are now finding their form. Arsenal are top of the league. So all these people mass transferring Van de Ven into their team off the back of him scoring 2 goals and getting a clean sheet against Everton, I don't know if they properly looked at his next fixtures coming up, which is why he's number 1 on my list of traps in this video. So who would I suggest instead? Well, if you're looking at similar priced options, how much is Van de Ven? He's about 4.7 million, I think. Well, roughly around the same price. I would suggest going for Mark Guehi. So Mark Guehi is just a little bit more pricey, just under 5 million. I would actually suggest he's been more consistent recently. His last 4 game weeks, Arsenal, Bournemouth, Everton, Liverpool. He got 2 assists out of those games. He's been getting his defensive contribution points. He didn't get a clean sheet bonus during those games, but his next games coming up are much more favourable, certainly than Tottenham. Brentford, Brighton, Wolves, Man United. I'm not saying Crystal Palace are going to win or it's going to be easy or they might even keep clean sheets, but getting Guehi in your team instead of Van de Ven for the next 3 game weeks at least is much more preferable in my opinion. However, if you have the budget and you can kind of push yourself up to a £6 million defender, then I would suggest any Arsenal defender with their next 2 fixtures against Burnley and Sunderland. I think both Timber and Gabriel, if you have the money, I'll probably try and upgrade to get one of those 2 players in as well. So that was the first trap, and before I go on to the next trap, if you've enjoyed this video so far, if you can please like and subscribe, I'll love you forever. Okay, next up is Mateta. I mentioned him last week, but I will mention him again because at the moment he is probably, I think, the 2nd most highly transferred in player for game week 10 at the time of recording, and I don't know why. He got a hat-trick, but he hasn't been consistent at all the last 4 game weeks, and for me, he looks like he's actually been dropping off a little bit, especially his last game against Arsenal. They did such a great job in basically shutting Palace out. I think he only got 1 penalty touch in that game against Arsenal with an expected goal involvement of 0.2. And whilst we're actually on the discussion of expected goal involvements, if we compare his season to date benchmark against all the other forwards, for a player price 7.6 million and getting more expensive because more people are transferring him in, he is not performing as I would like him to do for that price range. He's been getting decent expected goal involvements. I think he's got an expected goal involvement of 1 per 90 minute, which is incredible. However, his actual goal involvement is almost half that. So his finishing has been pretty poor, to say the least. He has not been slotting away his chances. And yes, his last 4 game weeks haven't been that particularly favourable. Arsenal, Bournemouth, Everton, Liverpool, but he's still got an expected goal involvement of 1.4 per 90 minutes, yet still couldn't slot away his chances with an actual goal involvement of just 0.8. His next games coming up: Brentford, Brighton, Wolves, Man United, much more favourable, but again, he's going to get in those positions to score. Is he going to slot away his chances? That's the big if. And that's why, for his price range, I don't think he is a person to buy. I think he's a trap that you should be avoiding. And I will tell you who I actually recommend to buy. He's a forward, and he's still a differential. And I'll tell you at the end of this video who that player I recommend to buy is after the next 2 traps, because they are also forwards. Which leads me on to Welbeck. Now, maybe I'm being harsh. He's my 3rd trap because he's a pretty decent budget option. However, I think he's outperforming to an unsustainable level. So let's take a look at his stats. He's only 6.4 million, and in his last 4 game weeks against Man United, Newcastle, Wolves, Chelsea, he's averaged about 3 shots in the box per 90 minutes, and only an expected goal involvement of 0.5, yet he has outperformed, by 3 times that? His actual goal involvement per 90 minutes is 1.5. So he's been well outperforming his expected figures. And now that is not something you can expect to continue. And I actually think he's probably winding down. He's on the decline. If we kind of look at his penalty touches and his attempts and his expected data from the season to the last 4 game weeks, I actually think he's on the decline. And although being a budget option, the player I'm going to suggest next is even more of a budget option and even more on form. So that's why I think Welbeck is also a trap and one to avoid. The 4th and final trap is Ellie Jr. Krupi. Now, he's burst onto the scene the last 2 game weeks for Bournemouth due to an injury of their main striker, Evanilson, and immediately he has scored 3 goals in those 2 appearances. However, those next 2 game weeks against City and Villa, they're tough. And the quote-unquote easier fixtures against West Ham and Sunderland, which are after those games, Evanilson will likely be back in the team and could very likely be the first choice starter. Now with Eli, will his form force himself into the team more and have more of a prominent role? Maybe, but we just don't know. So now I think it's best to avoid him and monitor him through these tougher 2 opponents in City and Villa. And then who knows, in 2 weeks, he might be a must-buy. I might be making a video about how he is definitely an essential person to buy. But 2 game weeks, the only 2 game weeks he's properly had a run in, it's just not enough data to really make such a decision on. And right now, even though he's cheap as chips, I wouldn't even want to use a free transfer on him to keep him on the bench. It's just too soon to tell what's going to happen with him after Evanilson is back. Because really, the balance you want on your bench, you want the cheapest players as possible who are gonna get the minutes. Will he continue getting minutes? We don't know. So let's keep a pin on him, not overreact, not get him in when he's now more expensive than he was previously. Let's just relax. If he's a good option still in the future, then he's a good option regardless of the minor price rise he's likely to incur. So let's just calm down and not use one of our free transfers. Save up your transfers regarding this player. So those were all the traps. Who is the forward I would recommend to go for over Mateta, Welbeck, and Eli? Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is Thiago, the Brentford striker. Now, his outputs, they're similar to that of Welbeck. But he's had more difficult opposition the last 4 games. And he also hasn't been unsustainably outperforming his expected goal involvements just as Welbeck has. If we have a look at his stats, last 4 game weeks, 0.8 expected goal involvement. He's only just outperformed with a goal involvement of 1.1 per 90 minutes. That's not as unsustainable. That's not outperforming your expected goal involvement 3 times like Welbeck was. And if we're still going to compare him to Welbeck, he's about $500,000 cheaper with good fixtures coming up as well. So he's 6.1 million at the point of recording, with Crystal Palace, Newcastle, Brighton and Burnley coming up in the next 4 game weeks. If he can score against Liverpool, if he can score against Man United, which I think he did, I'm not too sure now thinking about it, but if he can do those things, he can definitely score against any of these oppositions coming up the next 4 game weeks. So he is my go-to striker ahead of Welbeck, even Mateta, and certainly Eli. And I'm glad that I took my own advice on this. Me talking about it in my last video last week, I convinced myself to get him. I transferred out Isak and brought in Thiago, even though Thiago was going to be playing against Liverpool, and he got on the score sheet. It was a penalty, but he slotted it away, and I got the points. I'm a happy man. So I definitely recommend for you to bring in Thiago as well. He's a differential. Less than 5% owned? He's going to take your team to the next level. The next 4 fixtures are great for Brentford. So just do it. And so that concludes the list of the 4 traps to avoid for game week 10 and beyond. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do remember to like and subscribe. I've got another video coming out this week of the must-buy players. So I know you're not going to want to miss that one. This has been FPL Sucks. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video this week. Ciao, ciao.